Hi guys, welcome and who dat? I'm Joe. I got a haircut. I'm here to give you, in my opinion, the winners and the losers from training camp and from preseason so far. We have one preseason game left, and then this roster is going to be cut down to the final 53. You know, these roster moves happen constantly. So on Wednesdays, I post a video with the current roster, and usually by game time, a bunch of stuff has happened. Same thing happened last week. Had the video recorded, had a few more moves happen. I included those, and then lo and behold, the game comes on, and there's even more moves made. Backup left tackle Sage Doxtator was put on IR. All of a sudden, Brian Allen was back on the roster. Jordan Brown was back on the roster again. Moves are being made constantly, but the latest moves so far for this week is the Saints have waived Divine Azigbo, the running back. The Saints have waived quarterback KJ Costello. They have waived tight end Chris Herndon. We have come to an injury settlement with cornerback Jordan Brown, who was waived and wasn't picked up. And we have placed wide receiver Kevin White on IR. This gets the Saints down to 80 players. I will pull up the roster as it stands right now. We're going to take a look at the offense first, and I'm going to talk to you about the winners and the losers. Starting with the winners on the offensive side, our first winner, left tackle Trevor Penning. I'm going to speak about a few of the offensive linemen here, but I would like to highlight Trevor Penning. We were hoping that he would overcome his learning curve on pass protection and be a stud in the run as he has been his whole college career. So through the first two games, I got to say that I'm pretty impressed with Trevor Penning. I think if we had to start the season with him starting as our left tackle, we would be okay. James Hurst is a veteran guy, and he's probably going to be our starting left tackle this year. We've seen Penning extensively. Hurst is battling an injury. And I think there'll be some bumps and bruises if either Penning or Hurst starts at left tackle, especially since, we're coming off of a nice little stint with Teron Armstead. Teron got better and better and then, became one of the best. So I think James Hurst is who he is. He's a very good player. And he might get beat from time to time. And I feel the same way about Trevor Penning. I think he's a big winner so far through training camp and preseason. I would also like to mention Cesar Ruiz, who, just from a regular fan, the naked eye, he seems like he's gotten better. Hopefully, this will carry into the season, and this will be, his season to play like a bona fide first round draft pick. I would also like to mention Calvin Throckmorton. So far in preseason, he's played primarily right guard, but he played left guard last game as well. And I'm going to mention backup center Josh Andrews. I think that backup center slash guard Nick Martin is going to have that job as the backup center. But if we decide to keep 10 offensive linemen, then backup center guard Josh Andrews might be that 10th player. I like Lewis Kidd as the backup right tackle. He can play guard too. I don't know if he's played a lot of guard this training camp, but I think if we keep 10 offensive linemen for our 53-man roster, then that 10th guy will either be Lewis Kidd or Josh Andrews. I'm leaning towards Josh Andrews since he can play center and guard, but having an extra backup tackle wouldn't be bad either. All right, our next winner from training camp and preseason, I'm going to mention wide receiver Marques Callaway. I think that the big question after our top three, is who's going to be that number 4 go-to wide receiver. So, in my opinion, we're going to keep Michael Thomas, we're going to keep Jarvis Landry, we're going to keep Chris Olave, and we're going to keep Deontay Hardy, who will be our return specialist. Hardy's a pretty good receiver. I think personally we're going to keep 6 wide receivers, but we're definitely going to keep 5. And you've got a battle going on there between Marques Callaway and Kirk Merritt and Traquan Smith. Quan Baker has also shown a lot. But I think that we're definitely going to keep 5. Hardy will be number 4, and I believe Callaway has done enough to solidify that number 5 spot. Callaway has returned some punts, but he's been a consistent wide receiver. I think more so, of course, than Kirk Merritt or Traquan Smith. Now, Kirk Merritt's been tried out at running back. He's been on kick and punt returns, and he's looked good at wide receiver in camp. There's a possibility we could keep Merritt as our 6th wide receiver. There's also Traquan Smith, who, a lot of people don't like, and during the games, I'm so disappointed most of the time in Traquan Smith. But he's a great run blocker. So you keep 5 wide receivers. I think Marques Callaway is that 5th wide receiver. If you go ahead and try to keep 6, it'll either be Traquan Smith due to his run blocking or Kirk Merritt due to his ability to play multiple positions and the upside that we have with him. When it's all said and done, Merritt might be able to make it on the practice squad and hang on there without getting picked up. There wasn't a lot of teams going after Traquan Smith when he was a free agent. He only had 1 visit with the Falcons, and then he ends up getting re-signed by us. So whether we keep 5 receivers or 6, I don't know. But I do know that Marques Callaway has done enough to prove that he should be that number 5 wide receiver. Let's bring up another winner on offense, and that's halfback Tony Jones Jr. Yeah, Tony Jones Jr. shone last year in the preseason. Looked really good in training camp. So good that he beat out a pretty reliable, productive veteran in Latavius Murray. But when it came to crunch time, Tony Jones battling injury, not having a lot of chances, but when he did last year in the regular season, it wasn't too impressive. So he's an undrafted guy. Give him another chance. Let's see how he looks this year. And so far, he's looked good. He's looked fine as a running back. He's receiving the ball out of the backfield. He's also been returning kicks, and he's looked okay at that. Last week against Green Bay in the preseason game, he was covering kicks, and he made a couple of tackles. This was promising to me. This is something that I expected to see from Abram Smith, but we are seeing it from the running back, and that's Tony Jones. Dwayne Washington is a special teams player who covers, and he also returns. He's also good out of the backfield as a receiver, and he's fine as a running back. So I believe we'll keep four backs. I believe Tony Jones Jr. has earned that third spot, and Dwayne Washington can be our fourth guy, or however you look at it. Washington can be the fourth guy or the third guy, and Tony Jones Jr. can be the fourth guy. But Abram Smith will probably have to spend this season on the practice squad. So that's how I feel about the offense so far when it comes to winners. Let's pull up the current roster for the defense. Like I say, these things change all the time. This is the current one right now. This offense that I showed you, and this defense right here, plus our three specialists, all of that comes out to 80 players. All right. My winners on defense for training camp and preseason. Let's start with defensive end Tano Passigno. He has been the most disruptive defensive lineman so far in the preseason. He plays a defensive end and he can slide in and play defensive tackle. He's definitely going to be retained on this team. Technically, he's our number 4 defensive end. We haven't seen Cam Jordan play in the preseason. We know what we're getting from him. We haven't seen Marques Davenport in the preseason yet due to injury, recovering from injury. We've seen Peyton Turner. We haven't seen a lot of great stuff from Peyton Turner. We have high expectations. He was a first-round pick last year. But it was a COVID year. There was no training camp, no rookie mini camp. There was no preseason, and he was injured and missed most of the season. I think Peyton Turner only played 5 games last year. He shows signs of promise this year. He's had a chance to show some stuff going up against a rookie in Trevor Penning and James Hurst. And Peyton Turner's just kind of hot and cold right now. So I guess we're supposed to feel like this is really his rookie campaign continued. But because he's a first round pick, we have high expectations for Turner. Like I say, everybody that's played on the defensive line in preseason so far hasn't really stood out that much, with the exception of Passigno, especially in the passing game. And defensive tackle Malcolm Roach, who, despite getting that awful roughing the passer penalty, is a disruptive player. And he's pretty disruptive no matter when he's lining up, which is more than I can say for some of the other players on that defensive line. We're going to get to losers later. This next batch of winners on the defense I'd like to focus on is linebacker Chase Hansen and linebacker Eric Wilson. All right, let's talk about Hansen. Picked him up right before the preseason started. He had an outstanding game, the first preseason game. Had a very good game last week as well, except now he's battling injury again, which was his problem when he was on the team before. It's a numbers game at linebacker, and I don't think Chase Hansen is going to be retained, despite how well he looked in these first 2 games. If he plays in this third game and stands out, maybe something will change. But Eric Wilson, who has been our backup middle linebacker, has looked outstanding. He's played multiple spots, and he plays special teams, and he's very good at it, at covering kicks. But the fact that he's earned that middle spot behind Demario Davis, and the fact that he's shown up in both these preseason games has got me excited. Eric Wilson's a pretty young player. He's only been in the league a few years. And yeah, I think he's the standout right now at linebacker. You know, we haven't seen uh, Pete Warner, and Demario Davis hasn't played. Andrew Dow has played, and he's looked fine. Caden Ellis has played, and he's looked fine. We just signed John Bostic, the veteran, and he was forced to play last week, and he looked really good, despite only being on the team a couple of days. So those linebackers are all doing very well. Zach Bond had a chance to play last week, and he didn't really stand out much. But a guy that is standing out is Nephi Sewell, undrafted guy. He's looked really, really good. So as far as linebacker goes, if we keep 6 players, it's definitely going to be Werner, Davis, Ellis, and Eric Wilson. That's my opinion. Those last 2 spots, I believe, are going to go to John Bostic and Andrew Dowell. But Nephi Sewell could squeeze in there ahead of Dowell. It's possible. And Chase Hansen, mentioning all these other players. Chase Hansen balls out again in this preseason game, and maybe we find a spot for him instead. I think Zach Vaughn is the odd man out here. I'm hoping Dowell steps up in this 3rd preseason game. He's a solid player, solid special teamer. But Nephi Sewell has looked really good. So we'll keep our eye out on the linebackers. But kudos to Chase Hansen and Eric Wilson so far. In the secondary, our big winner so far is Paulson Adebo, who's looked incredible in training camp. Was outstanding the first couple of drives in the first preseason game, but he hasn't played in the preseason since then. Adebo doesn't need to really show anything else. The entire secondary has looked great. We haven't seen Lattimore in the preseason, but he looks fine in training camp. Taylor, our rookie, has looked great in training camp, and he hasn't made too many mistakes in the games. Courtney Roby has been balling this preseason. PJ Williams has looked great this preseason as well, and in training camp. His versatility is a plus. And CJ Gardner Johnson, who only played a drive or 2 in that first game, looked fantastic then, and he looks great in training camp. I mean, our entire secondary is stacked and balling, but Paulson Adebo is the man so far. And our last mentions for winners, we have a bunch of them, in my opinion. Kicker Will Lutz, back from injury and looking incredible. And punter Blake Gillikin, who, is probably going to be an all-pro and probably going to be our punter for well-paid punter for a long time to come. We go from Thomas Morstead to Blake Gillikin. I don't think it gets any better than that. Gillikin is so young. It seems like he's getting better. And in my opinion, he's one of the best punters right now. Will Lutz is obviously one of the best kickers in the league, but he was hurt all last year. We were wondering how he was going to come back from that injury. I believe he's only missed 2 kicks all training camp. He hasn't missed a kick in preseason. He nailed a 59-yarder this past game, which is, only 5 yards shy of the record. So I believe Will Lutz is a good kicker. He's a guy we should keep a hold of for sure. Woe was us last year with the kickers. I think we lost 2 games because we missed so many kicks. With Will Lutz, we'd have probably won those games. Not very many players on the roster you can point at and say, with this guy, you're a winner. Will Lutz is a winner. And Blake Gillikin is just a weapon. An 81, 82-yard punt last week. I believe his net for his 3 punts or 4 punts was in the 60s range. Just insane. For a net, I love Gillikin. And I'm going to give a shout out to Zach Wood as well. As long as Zach Wood has been our long snapper, we've never had a bad snap. We've never had a bad snap for a punt or for a field goal. Not that I can remember. Doesn't get any better than that, Zach. Thanks, brother. I'm also going to mention our returners. We've tried Dwayne Washington. We've tried Kirk Merritt. We've tried Tony Jones Jr., Marques Callaway. I'm kind of hoping we'll see Rashid Shaheed this preseason, but maybe not. We haven't seen him yet. But our man is Deontay Hardy, the All-Pro as a rookie, and last year he played a lot of wide receiver, though he was still very effective as a returner. I think Deontay Hardy's going to be our returner this year. He'll play at a Pro Bowl level. Altogether, our special teams are outstanding. So, that was your winners. We're going to pull up the offense again because we're going to start taking a look at some losers. All right, we'll pull up the offense. And we have one loser on the offense, a standout loser, and that is quarterback Ian Book. So I've been kind of disappointed in our backup offensive lineman play. I can't really put any of those players on this loser list. They're all pretty young and, suffering through preseason bumps and bruises. Uh, Ian Book, we've had him for a few years now. We've had him on the active roster for a couple of years now. This is Sean Payton's experiment, and I believe it's time to put this experiment to rest. I predicted in a previous video that the Saints would keep Ian Book on the active roster like they have in the last 2 years, but I'm really hoping we don't. I'm hoping that we've seen enough and you could go and get a veteran off the street that could perform better than Ian Book has. We've given him his chance. Keep him on the practice squad. If we can waive him and keep him on the practice squad, fine. I'm losing my patience, as I believe the rest of Who Dat Nation is, with quarterback Ian Book. I would rather have Trevor Siemian. I'm not going to lie. I'd rather have any of our backups that we've had in the last 10 years over Ian Book. Let's bring up the defense because this is where the disappointment comes for me. And I'll start by mentioning defensive end Carl Granderson and defensive tackle Kentavis Street. All right, Carl Granderson is a fine player. Because Marcus Davenport hasn't been in these preseason games, we've seen a lot of Carl Granderson. We've seen him go up against the other team's number ones and number twos. We've also seen him go up against a few threes. And that's where my disappointment comes in. Granderson seems to play to the level of competition he's playing against. He can be a fine starter, but in these preseason games, I expect to see a little more. Kentavis Street, on the other hand, he's been playing a majority of these snaps in preseason, and he just hasn't done anything. He hasn't looked good against the run. He hasn't been effective as a pass rusher. I'm singling out Street here, but I could also say the same for our draft pick Jordan Jackson, who has had a lot of playing time and hasn't really shown much, especially against the run. And defensive tackle Albert Huggins, who I loved. And this year he just is a shell of himself. He hasn't been able to produce much of anything, and he's been against those threes and fours. So very disappointed in Huggins. I'm really disappointed in the backup defensive ends. I mean, we have some guys that are not going to make the team for sure, but guys that we thought would at least compete. Josh Black, Taco Charlton. Charlton is fine when he's going against fourth stringers, but Josh Black hasn't shown me anything. So a big disappointment in our defensive line, the backups, how much pressure we're getting. These preseason games are full of vanilla play calls, and so once we scheme stuff up, maybe some of these guys can show something. But I don't think Contavious Street is going to make this team. Carl Granderson definitely will make this team. And hopefully he can ball in the regular season. And I save our secondary for last because this is where the biggest disappointment outside of Ian Book has been for me when it comes to losers. Cornerback DeMarcus Fields, cornerback Vincent Gray, and defensive back Brian Allen. All right. Brian Allen had an interception in the first game. Then he got burnt right after. And he got burnt again a few times in the last preseason game. Brian Allen is a waste of our time. Maybe keep him on the practice squad if the coaches see something, that this regular old fan doesn't. DeMarcus Fields, on the other hand, that guy reminds me of somebody like Alex Molden. A guy that's around the ball, but he's constantly getting beat. Fields makes a play and then gets burnt two or three times. And this secondary, I don't think we have time for stuff like that. Same thing with Vincent Gray. Anytime the opposing offense this preseason is moving up and down the field, I guarantee you they're throwing at Fields, Gray, and Allen. They're the ones allowing all the catches. That's what I've seen so far through two preseason games. I'm not sure if Fields or Gray or Allen are even worth a spot on our practice squad. I think we will retain DeMarcus Fields. I don't know if Allen or Gray qualify for the practice squad, but we have such a high standard at cornerback right now that, especially with our top four guys at cornerback and our top four guys at safety, that, yeah, if we ever had to hit the field with someone like Fields as a starter or a nickel or a dime, yeah, we're going to get torched. So those are my biggest losers of training camp and preseason. So that's it. I hope you guys can understand where I'm coming from with these big winners and losers. I'm going to do another video next week, and we're gonna show the 53-man roster, the actual one, for the brief moment in time that it that it happens. Because, like I say, the roster changes all the time. This is your 80 players right now. Unless something happens between now, which is Wednesday, and preseason game 3 on Friday. These are our 80 players. We're going to cut down next week to 53. I'm going to quickly pull up my hope for a 53-man roster. We'll pull up my predicted offense first. I'm going to go ahead and say Josh Andrews can be our 10th offensive lineman. That could very well be Lewis Kidd. I would rather have a 10th offensive lineman than a third quarterback. I think Taysom Hill is a fine emergency quarterback. So let's get rid of Ian Book and let's keep a 10th offensive lineman. The wide receivers, I have Kirk Merritt there instead of Traquan Smith. I also have decided that with the poor showing of our backup defensive lineman, we may be better off just keeping that fourth tight end in Jawan Johnson. He shows up during the regular season from time to time. He shows up in training camp. He hasn't shown up much in preseason yet. But that's the way I look at the offense. That's the route I think we should go. If we keep Traquan Smith instead of Kurt Merritt, I'll understand. If we keep Lewis Kidd instead of Josh Andrews, I'll understand that as well. Now we'll pull up the defense. And that's where it's tricky. I've got us keeping Andrew Dow and John Bostic. Some people may prefer Nefi Sewell or Chase Hansen, but I do not have Zach Bond on this list. If we don't keep Juwan Johnson as a fourth tight end, then we would have room for one more defensive lineman or one more secondary presence. And I believe with the way things are right now, if we don't keep Juwan Johnson and we don't keep a 10th offensive lineman, then that extra spot should go to Justin Evans at safety. Or there's a chance we only keep 5 linebackers. And if that's the case, then yeah, that extra spot, like I say, should go to Justin Evans at safety. He's the best player that we could pop in there. If we do keep an extra defensive lineman, I don't know who that would be. I'm leaning towards Albert Huggins, but this is the way I look at our defense for our final 53. So here's my hope for our 53-man roster. Of course, this doesn't include our kicker, punter, and long snapper. So that's my hope. That's my wish. We'll see what the Saints do. Thanks for watching. I'm Joe. Please subscribe to Rosenfield 10 for more videos like this. And I'll see you next week. Until then, who dat?